The Story Vault presents The Berserker, Episode 6, The Fire and the Blade. The embers of last night's fire pulse weakly in the dark cave, casting only the faintest glow on the damp stone walls. The girl stirs beneath the thick fur wrapped around her, the remnants of sleep clinging to her weary body. Her limbs are stiff, but there is warmth now, lingering from the night before. Outside, the wind still howls, but it is distant, muffled by the cave's shelter. She exhales, watching the thin cloud of her breath dissipate into the cold air. The berserker is gone. She shifts, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the pelt against her bare skin. Last night, after the river stole the warmth from her bones, her soaked dress had become a death sentence. The berserker had known it. He'd torn it away, replacing it with the only thing that could keep her alive, his own fur cloak, wrapped around her like a cocoon. Now she is draped in layers of rough, heavy fur, not elegant, not fitted, but warm. Survival mattered more than modesty in this place. She pulls it tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she had been. Then a sound. Her head snaps toward the cave entrance. Footsteps crunch against the snow, heavy, slow, unsteady. She grips the knife he left behind, pressing herself against the cave wall. A figure emerges from the blinding white. At first she thinks it's the berserker, but the shape is wrong. Thinner, slouched, dragging something behind him. A man stumbles forward, his face pale, lips cracked with cold. His clothing is torn, his fingers trembling. "Please," his voice is hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I mean no harm." The girl hesitates, the knife firm in her grip. Her heart pounds. She knows what the berserker would say. She should turn him away, but the man's eyes, sunken, desperate, plead with her. "I got lost. My camp was raided," he breathes, voice rasping like brittle ice. "They left me for dead." He stumbles forward, collapsing onto his knees. "Please, just a little warmth." She wavers. He looks pathetic, his body barely holding itself together. His hands tremble as he presses them against the cold stone floor, struggling to stay upright. He exhales sharply, and she sees his breath in the frigid air, each puff weaker than the last. "You'll freeze to death out there," she mutters, uncertain. "I know," he murmurs, his voice barely audible. "I just need to rest." His body sways, his breathing is ragged. She glances toward the cave entrance. The berserker is still gone. If he were here, this man wouldn't even make it past the threshold. She knows that, but he isn't here, and she isn't the berserker. Her fingers loosen around the knife. "Come inside," she says. The man exhales shakily, a small, grateful smile flickering across his lips. "Thank you." She steps aside as he crawls toward the fire, his form hunched, his body twitching violently as he nears the warmth. His hands stretch toward the flames, shaking as he basks in their glow. For a moment she feels relief. Then, just for a second, as the firelight flickers, she catches his eyes, not desperate, not weak, watching her. The sound of heavy footsteps in the snow. The berserker steps into the dim light, snow clinging to his fur-lined boots, his breath misting in the frozen air. Slung over his shoulder, a deer. Its lifeless form drips blood onto the icy stone, steam rising where the warmth of its body meets the cold. His storm-grey eyes flick to her, noting the knife in her hands, the tension in her frame. He says nothing at first, only exhales as he tosses the deer to the ground with a dull thud. "Eat soon," he rumbles. "Need strength." She nods, her grip on the knife loosening, but something in his posture shifts. Subtle. His eyes move past her, to the far end of the cave. She follows his gaze, and that's when he sees him. The man huddles near the fire, his form barely visible in the dim glow. He looks pitiful, half buried in tattered furs, his face pale and drawn. His breath rattles weakly in his chest. The berserker doesn't respond. His grip on his axe tightens just slightly. He was freezing, the girl says, defensive, though she isn't sure why. He could barely stand. I let him stay. The berserker's jaw clenches. His gaze never leaves the man. You should have left him. The stranger lets out a low, breathy chuckle. Mercy, rare in these lands, he murmurs, shifting as if to ease his discomfort. His limbs move stiffly, but there is something unnatural in his slowness, too deliberate, too controlled. The girl notices, for the first time, the way he watches her, not directly, not when she's looking, but from the corner of his eye. Measuring her, a shiver runs down her spine. She turns back to the berserker, but his expression tells her what she already knows. She's made a mistake. The stranger plays his part well. He shivers near the fire, hands shaking as he reaches toward the warmth, his breath uneven, his posture slouched. But when the girl isn't looking, his eyes change. Hunger flickers in them, not for food, but for something else. She doesn't notice, not yet. The berserker does. He skins the deer with methodical precision, his blade cutting through flesh with ease. The girl watches, eager to learn, but the stranger remains silent, watching them both. When the meal is cooked, the girl offers the man a share. He smiles weakly, accepting. His hands are less shaky now, his shoulders not quite as slumped. The berserker doesn't eat, he only watches. Nightfall. The fire burns low. Outside, the wind picks up once more, howling through the mountains. The girl lies wrapped in furs, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The berserker sits with his back to the cave wall, axe resting against his knee. His eyes are closed, but he is not sleeping. Across from them, the stranger shifts in the shadows. The girl breathes softly, deeply, already half lost to sleep. The man moves. Slowly, quietly. He inches toward her, his breathing steadying, his steps careful. His eyes flick toward the berserker, still unmoving. Closer. A shadow looms over her. His hand reaches out, then clamps over her mouth. She jerks awake, muffled panic escaping her throat. Then a shift, a blur of motion. The berserker is faster. A massive hand seizes the intruder by the throat, yanking him back with inhuman strength. The firelight flashes across the berserker's eyes, cold, merciless. I knew your kind, he murmurs. Weak men, liars. The intruder thrashes, but the berserker's grip is unyielding. His feet kick against the stone, hands clawing at the fingers crushing his windpipe. The berserker turns to the girl. Watch. Then, with one brutal motion, he buries his axe in the man's chest. The girl flinches as the body slumps to the ground. Blood pools on the frozen stone, dark and steaming. Silence. The berserker looks at her, his voice low, final. Never show mercy. The girl swallows hard. The knife in her hand suddenly feels heavier. She understands now. The storm rages outside, erasing the tracks of the dead. The fire crackles, the only warmth left in this frozen world. The girl does not sleep. The knife stays beside her hand, and the berserker knows she will never make that mistake again. Enjoying the Berserker? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping episodes. Let us know, should the girl start trusting the Berserker's judgment, or is mercy still worth the risk? Drop your thoughts below.